Good evening, everyone. My name is Alana Ramirez, and I'm here to give a rebuttal to my classmates' argument on whether or not the attack on the U.S. Capitol was an act of domestic terrorism. I would like to start out by explaining that my classmate took the stance of saying that the attack was not domestic terrorism. She first argues that according to U.S. law and definition, that there were violent and criminal acts carried out by individuals. However, she states that none of them were united under a common ideology. She first points to far-right extremist groups, but she points to groups such as Black Lives Matter, QAnon, and Antifa. While she is correct about the violent crimes, there are some false claims made in her first statement, which can further be broken down. For starters, Black Lives Matter is a decentralized political and social movement protesting police brutality and racial violent acts committed against Black people. There's no evidence upon any further investigation carried out by intelligence agencies that there were any sort of Black Lives Matter supporters involved within the Capitol riots. Secondly, FBI Director Chris Wray stated in a 2019 congressional hearing that Antifa is not a group, but rather an ideology, in which, according to other further investigation, there has been zero involvement, according to news outlets. Now, there have been three far-right extremist groups linked to the Capitol: the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, and the Three Presenters. According to the New York Times, of the 230 people charged so far, 31 have been known ties to far-right extremist groups, 26 of those being affiliated with Oath Keepers or the Proud Boys. Her next statement points to the lack of ideology that could point to the riot to be an act of domestic terrorism. However, it is evidence that the far-right extremist people and the Trump supporters who were involved within the riot had a very clear intention to delay the count of the Electoral College and put a stop to affirming Joe Biden as the 46th president of the United States. The day on January 6th started out as Donald Trump protesting the count of the Electoral College, and at the end of his speech that he gave that morning, he encouraged protesters to put a stop to the count and to continue to march all the way down to the Capitol. Now, there were deliberate links to those trying to incite violence at the Capitol. There's been evidence found throughout multiple investigations, whether that be the zip ties that we've seen in photos from journalists on the scene, whether it was the gallows set outside the Capitol, or video evidence shown in Donald Trump's second impeachment hearing encouraging the assassination of VP Mike Pence and House Majority Leader Nancy Pelosi. Despite all of this, there definitely was clear political agendas here, and it was definitely used to target anyone that stood in the way of another Trump presidency. Now, these Capitol rioters were definitely radicalized extremists inspired by Donald Trump. Many of them were not convicted of domestic terrorism, but there's a reason for that. Currently, there is no federal criminal statute that establishes criminal penalties solely for domestic terrorism in the United States. In other words, someone can commit a criminal act of violence and it can be considered domestic terrorism, but they will not be prosecuted for domestic terrorism alone, but instead prosecuted for the criminal acts themselves, which basically means there's really no way for people to be considered a domestic terrorist under current federal law. Now, my classmate goes on to explain how the Capitol riot was not an act of domestic terrorism, and she compared it to two different mass shootings in the last 5 years. She prominently starts by talking about the San Bernardino shooting. She starts by comparing that the 5 people who died at the riots was very different from the 14 people who died in the shooting. I believe that's like comparing apples to oranges. While the Capitol rioters were not there to attack a single civilian population, they were attacking our democracy, and they did hurt other people in the process. They did stockpile weapons, and they did have a deliberate message. There was explosives found in multiple cars outside of the Capitol, as well as other firearms. And they did bring said firearms and other weapons, such as spears, into the Capitol. While this not may look like our typical case of domestic terrorism, such as the shooting in San Bernardino, it definitely was a clear message there. Now, I would like to wrap up by saying that the U.S. law for domestic terrorism states that there needs to be acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the U.S. or in any states that appear to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. Now, it is evident that the rioters fit both of these definitions. There's video evidence and media reports that depict contributors committing acts dangerous to human life. Those actions were definitely intended to influence the policy of the U.S. government by intimidation and affects its conduct through possible assassination and or kidnapping. Well, thank you so much for taking your time today. Have a great day.